Car subscriptions are coming. And no, I'm not talking about heated seats being locked behind a paywall. I'm talking about subscriptions to cars themselves. Subscription services that allow you to pay monthly for access to a roster of vehicles of varying makes, models, and trim levels, because car ownership is becoming more and more rare in modern times, and as the average number of people who can afford to buy new decreases, automakers and private companies are looking for newer ways to get you into the latest model. In this sense, car subscriptions would theoretically offer a lot of financial flexibility, with the potential for shorter-term commitments and the freedom of not having to lease, not having to buy, not having to take out an auto loan at 36% interest at Kunkelman Chevrolet. Yet it's a bizarre proposition in a society that has spent well over a century doing things in one particular way, and it becomes an even bigger issue when you tell your potential consumers that they now have yet another monthly subscription bill to keep track of. But while the common sense response here is to say, well, who on earth asked for this? The reality is that more people are on board with this idea at a conceptual level than you might think. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Is a subscription model for car ownership sustainable for companies and consumers alike? What are the positives? What are the negatives? And what does this mean for the future of car ownership? Let's break it down. Hit it.
Roman report at the end of the month, and I make what I want when I feel like discussing cars.
Last month, a study was conducted by Extreme Terrain to ascertain just how ready the average American is to dive into the uncharted waters of subscription cars. Their survey of 1,005 Americans found that 46% would consider a car subscription in place of traditional means of getting a car, such as buying or leasing. Another 10% stated they would be interested if insurance and maintenance were included in the subscription price. And some services are doing exactly this, factoring insurance and maintenance into the service to make for attractive packages for consumers at varying price levels, as we'll get to later. But what's interesting is the demographic breakdown here, as the study shows some surprising results related not just to who the most interested parties would be for this kind of service, but what these potential customers would be willing to pay. Quote, women showed slightly more interest than men, 49% versus 45%. Baby boomers were the most open to subscribing to a vehicle, 55%, followed by Gen Z and millennials, 46% each, and Gen X, 45%. When it comes to budget, 1 in 5 Americans would be willing to shell out over $600 a month for a car subscription. Gen Z drivers were the most willing to pay that much, 35%, while just 15% of Gen X and millennials and 11% of baby boomers said the same. End quote. To the surprise of almost no one, Gen Z and millennials preferred Tesla as their hypothetical choice, should they have the option of a car subscription, even though the brand came dead last in the survey overall when it comes to which car brands respondents found most desirable. The top 10 were Toyota, Honda, Subaru, BMW, Lexus, Nissan, Hyundai, Audi, Ford, and Jeep. But what I found fascinating was the generational split. Millennials showed the highest preference for EVs, whereas baby boomers and Gen Z each showed a stronger preference for hybrids. Meanwhile, Gen X drivers were the ones who showed the greatest preference for gas-powered vehicles. And in a way, it sort of all tracks, right? Boomers and Gen Z are both on opposite ends of adult life. with Gen Z more or less just getting started and boomers entering their twilight years. Both have reason to be financially savvy. A hybrid makes sense, and at least in my experience, millennials tend to be more interested in trendiness or social consciousness, or sometimes both in equal measure, which is why EVs make sense for them. And Gen X had their prime years during a great era for cars, at least in my opinion, so it would make sense that they'd be stuck in their ways and less likely to change from what they've known, because the standard of cars was higher. Maybe not in terms of reliability or performance or technology, but I would argue in terms of style, character, and rebelliously individual appeal. But back to the question of car subscriptions. Sure, it could be profitable in the short term, but is this actually a plausible long-term business model? Well, beyond this study, there is evidence that the car subscription model could potentially work long-term. You look at a business like Zipcar, which was purchased by Avis in 2013 for $500 million, and you can see how this is possible. With Zipcar, you're basically paying a monthly fee to borrow a car, booking by the day, the hour, or even the minute, it seems. You could even book by a set mileage, with options for gas and insurance packages included. The variety of cars on offer suggests that versatility is the draw more than convenience or cost, because you can get a specific car for a specific situation, or a specific time of year. Have a Miata in the summer and a 4Runner in the winter, you know? And in the mobile app, Zipcars allows you to book cars as far as a year in advance of when you'll actually need it. It's a very interesting proposition in a lot of ways. Tradition says this wouldn't work, but in 2016, just 3 years after their acquisition by Avis, Zipcar's membership surpassed 1 million users. And they're still up and running today, so there's indication that this could potentially work. If nothing else, this aligns with what we're seeing with Jaguar Land Rover. You see, they work alongside InMotion Ventures Studio, which acts as something of a feeder system for startups that Jaguar Land Rover can potentially integrate into their business model. It seems that the idea is to find a way to compete with your Zipcars of the world, and so InMotion has kept on top of this developing sector. And the result has been 2 promising startups, The Out and Pivotal. Based out of London, The Out is a sort of luxury version of Zipcar, and as InMotion's managing director Jasdeep Sahani told Fortune back in February, they've seen really encouraging results, such as in the case of a wealthy woman from London who has rented a Range Rover from the service every single weekend for 2 years running now, surpassing in subscription fees what she would have paid had she just bought the Range Rover herself. Yet as Sahani explained to Fortune, this client is paying for the convenience of having the car brought to her office so she can spend the weekend in the country, and then somebody comes to her home to pick it up on Sunday. In effect, the strains and struggles of car ownership are out of her hair until she decides she wants a car again. And yeah, it's the privilege of the wealthy. But then, The Out is a luxury service. Businesses like Zipcar and other potential startups would be aimed at a larger clientele, with people at more varying income levels, presumably. Of course, whether it's a luxury car or not, the effect is the same. Low responsibility means low stress. You buy a car and you're tied to that car and everything that might go wrong with it. But with the subscription service, that's not really your problem. This ties into part of Extreme Terrain's survey, which found that 30% of respondents were less likely to take care of a car they didn't own. And I think that sort of goes to human nature, right? If you borrow a friend's or a family member's car, you're not going to mess it up because you don't want to upset them. And at a basic person-to-person level, you understand what it means to respect another person's things, particularly when that person is someone you care about. But a subscription service eliminates that imperative so that unless you're just naturally the type of person who tries to leave things better than you found them, you're probably not going to go out of your way to avoid curb rashing the wheels or not eating things that crumb while you're inside a car with thick folds between each portion of the seat. Maybe you get an iced coffee and let it go topless because you don't care if it spills at this point since you're getting a different car next weekend anyway. And you know that's chaos demon behavior, but who am I to judge? And while I'm sure fees are baked in like a security deposit, it'd be less than you'd pay to own a car outright, at least in theory. But for now, a preference for car subscriptions seems to be entirely the domain of the wealthy, which brings us back around to the other of the two services that InMotion has wrangled for Jaguar Land Rover, a tiered subscription platform known as Pivotal, which allows users to swap out models through an app similar to what we see with Zipcar and, let's be honest, any company that is going to try to do this. If consumers can't book or cancel or extend a reservation through their phone, if they have to go on a desktop or, God forbid, call somebody, they're just going to stick with their Ford Focus with the Roush catback and the midwing they found in a scrapyard off the interstate. Thank you very much. Now, subscription fees for Pivotal scale from $1,200 to $2,700 each month. And it appears they require a 3-month commitment for all new enrollees. With an average customer age between 35 and 45, it suggests that this subscription model is sustained by younger drivers than the typical new car purchaser, who tends to be a bit older, around 52 years old. And InMotion's managing director has found this to be a net positive for the future, telling Fortune back in February that, quote, "We always knew that subscription as a consumption model, from a customer perspective, was always driven by the younger demographics." End quote. So let's review the positives and the negatives of this approach to car ownership. Ownership being in huge air quotes. And we'll go over the pros and cons for consumers and then break down the pros and cons for the companies themselves to see if this is a future that can be justified, much less sustained. If the monthly fee includes certain features baked in, like insurance, maintenance, and other things like roadside assistance, that's going to be super appealing and potentially draw the most customers. Because it's huge to know that if your Civic blows a head gasket, you're not stuck with an insane bill just so you have some way of getting to work. You swap it out for another car, or you wait for the company to just have the car fixed outright. And in this way, you also might not have to do any of those bothersome things that we all have to do with cars that we own, where you're doing this extensive shopping for insurance or trying to haggle a good price out of a dealership or out of some random dude online. There's also the benefit that these subscriptions would allow you to switch cars easier than going through the hassle of a trade-in, since again, you wouldn't have to find your way out of a lease or haggle back and forth with some guy on Marketplace just to get enough money to go buy something that's hardly better than what you already had. And considering that as many as 36% of respondents to the Extreme Terrain survey would prefer to switch cars annually if they were to join a subscription car service, the suggestion is that convenience is going to be a huge factor in allowing this concept to appeal to the most people. And on the subject of haggling, another benefit here is that depreciation isn't really a factor, since you're not going to be selling the car, so who cares? You might also get the chance to drive cars you normally wouldn't have been able to otherwise. And perhaps most importantly to a certain subset of people, you could stunt on friends and enemies alike, or you could get the thrill of driving a Cybertruck without the insurmountable social stigma of owning a Cybertruck. These services allow you to set the credit limit of your own social capital by choosing how you appear to others, like showing up with a new gym body but without any of the necessary hard work. Or, dieting. Yet the cons here are the same negatives you see with any rental car you might try to get. For one, the car you want might not be available. Maybe there's high demand for the one you want and you just can't get it. But also, depending on the kind of car you're trying to get, it may cost more to subscribe for a year than to just buy used outright. Because if a company is going to include insurance and maintenance and roadside assistance in the subscription fee, that fee is probably going to be like 75% of most people's rent, if not the entirety. You might also have to deal with limits on the amount of miles you can rack up, meaning you can't necessarily just drive this to your heart's content without potentially paying more. And while companies can restrict mileage, they can't really restrict how people are driving their cars. You may finally get to drive that Corvette you've always wanted, but maybe you got it after its suspension has already been worn down by a thrill seeker who's never seen the inside of a peaceful mind. And okay, let's say all the cars are in perfect condition. I would think the odds are pretty strong that they're not going to let you modify these things. So those tuner car dreams are going to have to stay that way unless you have the money to just go buy a project car yourself. And then there's the reality that these services aren't available everywhere. They have the same availability in most places as electric vehicle infrastructure, if not worse. And even if they are in your area, again, selection might be limited, which brings me to the last negative for consumers, but perhaps one of the biggest. And that's the fact that you don't have any equity in these cars. On the one hand, you're not responsible for its upkeep, but you can't exactly make money on the car either, since you can't sell it. You're shoveling money into a vehicle that will never make money for you because you own nothing. But even more than that, your lack of ownership or equity in the car could mean restrictions on just what you could use it for. What could seem like freedom on paper could actually be restriction in practice, because there could be severe limitations on otherwise limitless cars. And this is before even getting into all the things a company could potentially do with your data once you return the car. As I've done a previous Roman report on all the ways modern tech is used to spy on drivers and jack up insurance rates, among other sketchy activities. And I know this probably isn't all that different from the types of perils you'd get from a rental car agency. But while vehicles from car subscription services can often be rented out for any duration, the goal seems to be to get people to use cars for extended periods of time, such as how Access by BMW mandated that you had to drive a car for a year before you could switch for another. It all feels like the automotive equivalent of how streaming services only ever seem to recommend TV shows rather than movies, because a series will keep you on the app longer than a movie will. And the goal is to keep you on the app. And same deal, the goal here is to keep you in a car, any car, for as long as possible. But why would this make sense for companies? Particularly since the margins on this kind of business have got to be crazy. Well, the pros are a lot more obvious, but they're also a lot more insidious in some ways. For automakers, a subscription model for cars would monetize consumers at a recurring basis, so that rather than having a consumer buy one car and just hope that they become a lifetime customer, you can simply charge them over and over again for this one car. The woman in London who paid well over the cost of a Range Rover just to rent one from the subscription service, that's the proof of concept for just about any automaker salivating at the thought of wringing an extra dollar out of consumers who don't want to have to think about the logistics of owning a car. If automakers can help make subscription cars the new Netflix, that's the dream for these guys. Recurring revenue, an unending stream of green. And if an automaker has their own subscription service with its own proprietary app, that sort of approach develops brand loyalty because it'll be easier to swap cars in and out while remaining under the same brand umbrella. Because if they choose Zip cars, a Honda isn't the only type of car you'll be able to get there. But if Honda creates their own competing service, they make certain that the consumer is only driving Honda cars. And we see this here with Jaguar Land Rover and Pivotal. Then, of course, there's the other big benefit besides money, which is that you get detailed insights into customer preferences through all that tasty data. Because it's easier to upsell a consumer you know everything about. This model could also allow dealers and automakers to achieve something they've fought for but have had a hard time acquiring: a younger consumer base. Younger drivers don't care about actually owning their car. They just want access to the car they want. And for even younger drivers, this could get them in the door. Parents might be more likely to get, air quotes, their son or daughter a car if they know it's low mileage, up to date, with all the latest safety features, get you that whole nanny state workup and maybe tracking installed or something along those lines, get Life 360 in there. And it's more appealing to the parent because they know if the kid totals the car, they aren't going to be on the hook for it depending on the terms of the subscription contract, I guess. Although this obviously undermines the idea of these cars being safer for young drivers, since a kid might be more likely to drive recklessly if it's a car their parent has no real financial stake in. But that's just a guess on my part, of sorts. Another positive for the automakers is offsetting potential losses due to the tariffs that I talked about at length just last month. Now, while 22% of respondents to the Extreme Terrain survey note suffering from subscription fatigue over the volume of connecting car features, this fatigue is overshadowed by the 46% who say the tariffs have made them more likely to consider car subscription services, particularly with the potential for increased car prices in the coming months. Yet, for as promising as this sounds for automakers thinking about rolling out a subscription service, the logistics make this a daunting proposition. For one, you need the infrastructure in place to handle delivery and returns to high traffic and low traffic regions alike if you're ever going to see profit. Because making a car subscription attractive to the average consumer will require operational costs so high you'll find them up there next to Vanguard 1. And people aren't going to want to do this without the included maintenance, without insurance factored in, without a reliable customer service and roadside assistance component included. It would also need to be convenient, first and foremost, not a bunch of paperwork and waiting and driving to remote pickup and drop-off locations. It would essentially need to be as convenient as actually owning a car would be. It wouldn't make sense for the average person otherwise. So that means you've got to be making deals with repair shops in each area to partner with you on maintaining these cars. It means buying up land to develop the facilities where these cars will be housed if you aren't already an automaker or a dealer with pre-existing facilities for fleet purposes. It means dealing with insurance companies. It means acquisitions, and all of this while dealing with issues like depreciation and customer trends. And then there's the possibility that any gains from a subscription program could come at the cost of actual sales. In a way, the negatives outweigh the positives, because a business like this would take a long-ass time to make money. You'd probably just be eating losses for years trying to get it up and running, and not everybody has that kind of money or time. Not every company can be like Zipcar, considering the sheer volume of companies who've already tried and gone under. In the UK, there was Car2Go, which merged with Drive Now to become Share Now, which then became a subsidiary of Stellantis in order to provide car-sharing services throughout Europe. There was Access by BMW, which launched in 2018 at a subscription price of roughly $2,000 a month, for access to such choices as the 4 Series and 5 Series sedans, the X5 SUV, and all the plug-in hybrid versions of that lineup, whereas you had to be a member of the $3,700 per month tier to get the M4, the M5, and the M6 convertibles, or the X5M and X6M sport utility models. The subscription price included maintenance and insurance, as well as roadside assistance, but again, if I read correctly, users were only allowed to change cars once each year. Either way, the approach wasn't enough to get Access by BMW past the pilot project phase, yet that hasn't really deterred all automakers. Just last year in Atlanta, Volkswagen launched Flex, a car subscription service that offers month-to-month pricing and includes insurance and maintenance in the bargain, allowing consumers the freedom to keep the car for as long or as briefly as they want. From what I could find, ballpark subscription fees could reach as high as $800 a month, so less than BMW's subscription, but more than Volvo's. And like BMW's, Volvo's failed, as Care by Volvo charged around $650 per month and allowed you to change your car every 4 months. So better, but still not enough to talk people into the idea. Same deal with Audi, who got out of the car subscription business altogether back in 2021, after testing out their service in the Dallas-Fort Worth area at roughly $1,000 per month. Of course, while BMW's subscription service went under, Porsche's still seems to be pretty active. Porsche Drive is available in Arizona, California, Georgia, Illinois, Kentucky, New Jersey, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Tennessee, and Texas. So a pretty good spread across the country. Unsurprisingly, it's among the more expensive options mentioned here, since the base tier is around $1,800 a month to subscribe to one car, with the option to subscribe to multiple cars for $4,000 a month. It's steep, but it's outlasted most of the options listed above, along with others like Book by Cadillac and Maven by General Motors. All of this makes more sense for non-automakers to do than automakers themselves, oddly enough. Sure, automakers would have a lot more infrastructure to work with, at least theoretically, but I feel like it could sometimes be hard to overcome settled perceptions of a brand in order to make a subscription service for that brand viable, unless they're offering something that's in high demand at an attractive price. And while non-automakers might have more hurdles to jump through, there isn't a cooked-in brand perception, and they aren't limited in which vehicles and brands they can offer, whereas a Ford subscription service wouldn't offer you the choice of a Camaro. Limitation seems baked into this process, which makes it difficult to ascertain how a larger consumer base would react to these services beyond what we've already seen. You have your Zipcar-sized successes for some, your moderate to middling success for others, and outright failure for most. Now I'll get to my conclusion on all of this in a minute, but first, I need your help to take over the world. Every day, automotive content creators are driving terrible cars. Did you know that 2 out of 2 content creators for this channel will never receive access to a press vehicle ever again due to raunchy jokes, touchy language, and an excess of literary theory? But you can support this channel to continue to create videos for just $1 a month on Patreon. Enjoy early access to Race to the Bottom, The Roman Report, and RCR Stories historical documentaries, along with exclusive content like Mr. Regular's thoughts on Race to the Bottom cars, long-form essays, car show videos, unfiltered alternate takes of RCR videos, and the Regular Friends podcast. If even 5% of our subscribers joined our Patreon, nobody could tell us jack. Regular car reviews could take over the world and continue to make the absolute best automotive videos you'll find anywhere on the internet. $1 a month to change the life of an automotive YouTuber in your life. And if you'd like to support us in another way, order from our merch site, linked below. For every order that comes in, I'll send you a personalized thank you video. Support RCR today so you can get more videos tomorrow. Well, technically you would get them the minute you joined the Patreon, but you know what I meant. I'm just saying. So my conclusion on car subscription services? Well, I can see how automakers would see this as viable. On the one hand, you can get precious user data and introduce new customers to your brand who might not otherwise have given it a chance, thereby creating new, loyal brand buddies. But this type of model is going to rely on drivers with means, more than drivers looking simply for flexibility. It's sort of ironic. To succeed, a business like this would need to be flexible in terms of which cars they provide and which features are included. What are the perks that the consumers are going to be getting here? Yet the type of consumer most likely to use these programs would probably have enough financial flexibility not to need them in the first place. Are there enough consumers to make this business model viable? And are there enough pros to outweigh the cons of fleet depreciation, thin margins, and skeptical consumer bases? Probably not. To become standard, these subscription services will likely need to be more competitively priced, though I would argue Volvo did that and didn't succeed. Audi, meanwhile, did the other thing I would have recommended and launched their program in a densely populated metropolitan area. I just don't know if Dallas-Fort Worth was the right choice, you know? I guess it would all come down to selection, and again, the features. People don't want to pay an insane monthly subscription to drive a Volvo, and while an Audi is nice, anyone who'd want to drive one could probably afford to own one, I'd think. At best, this can only supplement the car ownership dilemma, not solve it. This isn't going to take the place of buying a car or leasing one. For some, that might sound tragic. But I think within the automotive enthusiast community, it's probably a sigh of relief, if it's even something they think about, since it seems more and more car guys just buy off each other rather than going through some dealership. These types of services really only make sense if you privilege access over ownership. But I don't really know that dedicated car guys think that way. They want the car to be theirs, to imprint themselves upon it, to have an unrestricted experience that you can only get when the car belongs to you. These cars won't belong to you. Again, you will own nothing, and you'll end up beholden to the limitations imposed upon you by the company, leaving you to question whether the value gained is worth the cost incurred. I have a hard time believing this is the future of cars, for logistical reasons more than any other. But maybe I'll be wrong, and leases and loans will become a thing of the distant past. And maybe someday I'll be president of the internet. But what do you think? Are car subscriptions the future of the auto industry? Just a flash in the pan? Or will they be here to stay, just as more of a niche for metropolitan areas rather than something that catches on everywhere? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. I love to read them and interact. My screen name is Limited Time Roman. Be on the lookout. And if you enjoyed this video, or if RCR brings any sort of value to your week, please consider leaving a like, a comment, sharing the video, or even subscribing. And be sure to tap the bell icon so you're notified for every new video. Thank you so much for watching. Have an outstanding rest of your week.